Imagine surviving the Middle Ages armed only with gruel, stale bread, and questionable dental hygiene. Forget dragons. Truly, the scariest beast was that relentless bowl of glorified oatmeal, aka gruel, staring you down at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That, or the dental bill, though spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Popular myth paints medieval diets as an eternal Monday morning blues festival. Endless gray porridge and bread so hard it could double as a doorstop. Gruel, the original sad desk lunch, before sad desk lunches were a thing. Movies eat up this narrative. If Hollywood were your history teacher, medieval cuisine was basically 50 Shades of Bland. Feast scenes? Skip 'em! Instead, filmmakers zoom in on rugged types gnawing on brick-hard bread like beavers. No wonder historians get toothaches trying to debunk this myth. But let's spice things up, literally. The real deal? Even folks of modest means weren't condemned to a lifetime of unseasoned mush. Nobles enjoyed roasted meats, hearty stews, flaky pies, local cheeses, and believe it or not, a bona fide spice rack where saffron, pepper, cloves, and sugar ruled as the ultimate flex of wealth and worldliness. Even medieval Instagrammers wouldn't post just porridge. Where's the cheese pull? Sure, poorer households weren't knocking back turducken every Sunday, but life wasn't all watery glop. Their menus featured beans, lentils, root veggies, fresh-caught fish, and bread warm and crusty enough to make you momentarily forget the universe's many hygiene fails. Stale loaves made terrible pillows but fantastic soup thickeners. Silver lining. Markets bustled with veggies, fruits, and, when luck smacked their way, fresh bread, not just last week's doorstops. Midnight snack? No problem. Taverns and fairs offered proto-fast food fixes, minus the drive-through horses. So yes, medieval eating wasn't just survival. Sometimes it was a culinary adventure, dental and otherwise. While diet is often misunderstood, myths about medieval hygiene also paint an inaccurate picture of the times. Picture the Middle Ages as one endless, pungent mosh pit. Everyone grimy, everyone reeking, and rivers running not just with mud, but maybe a splash of regret. Enter the legendary myth. Medieval folk hated water. Supposedly, they avoided baths like dragons dodge dragon slayers, choosing instead to marinate in their own natural eau de funk. If that were true, how did perfume not become Europe's hottest export? And why didn't knights joust just for a chance at a bath? So what's the real dirt on dirt? Medieval folks adored a good scrub. Bathhouses were the social hubs, nearly as crowded as taverns, and just as full of dubious characters. Minus the cucumber water, of course. Nobles and merchants booked regular soak sessions, weekly if you could afford it, seasonally if you lived in the boonies. Almost everyone bathed before church or special events. Picture medieval laundry day, clutching your garments, praying they don't stage a mutiny and walk off. Even peasants washed up regularly, especially on Sundays when no one wanted to perfume the pews with their own brand of eau de barnyard. And yes, soap wasn't just something flung in low-budget town feuds, it was bona fide cleaning gear. Monasteries didn't only crank out beer, they had entire chapters devoted to hygiene, proving monks cared about holy and wholly fresh armpits. Medical theories didn't brand water as a quick trip to the afterlife unless you were a vampire or an overly timid medic. So next time someone claims historical stench was universal, remind them. Knights thirsted for the Holy Grail, but many would have traded it for a solid bar of soap. If everyone truly stank, perfume dealers would have needed suits of armor to survive the scented stampedes. Medieval life was muddy, sure, but it definitely wasn't a buffet for odor. In addition to misconceptions about personal cleanliness, there are also widespread myths regarding the conditions of medieval housing. Imagine every medieval peasant squeezed into a chimney sweep's shoebox. That's the classic medieval housing cliché. Picture grimy serfs squinting through a constant haze of wood smoke, dodging goats who had VIP front-row seats to dinner, bedtime, and all the awkward in-between moments. In our collective imagination, everyone's basically auditioning for Dickensian street urchins, centuries before Dickens even showed up. But here's the first myth to go up in smoke. Medieval homes weren't all identical sootboxes. Sure, many cottages doubled as smoke inhalation chambers with open hearths and zero chimneys, a spa day for your lungs, and ceilings so charcoal chic they were goth before goth was cool. Yet not every peasant's home felt like a soggy rabbit hutch. Housing styles and elbow room varied widely, depending on region, wealth, and the passing centuries. Some even had windows. No sunrooms, unfortunately, and the occasional separate room or loft to escape from the goats. Upgrade to nobility, and the real estate gets a serious glow-up. Stone manor houses, tiled floors, glass windows, and actual privacy. Think Game of Thrones without dragons. Unless you count the Lord Chamberlain's mother-in-law. Even city dwellers lived large with multi-story townhouses sporting shops downstairs, families upstairs, and, shockingly, some indoor plumbing. Yes, flushing toilets existed long before skinny jeans made a splash. So while medieval folk never mastered the open-concept kitchen, they nailed open-fire smog. But if you could cough up the cash, you might enjoy whitewashed walls, tiled floors, and enough room to trip over something fancier than livestock. Let's just say, not everyone was blessed with Instagram lighting. But hey, they made do. Beyond living conditions, popular beliefs also exaggerate the exclusivity of education during the medieval era. Imagine a world where your entire education boiled down to, "Thou shalt not spill the ink." And only 2 groups actually had ink to spill. Welcome to the mythical Middle Ages, where being literate supposedly meant either sporting a tonsure and embracing eternal silence, or living in a castle with enough echo to make your whispered sonnets bounce around. Picture monks hunched solemnly over glowing parchments, and nobles scribbling poems so sacred nobody dared correct them for fear of starting a joust over misplaced words. Meanwhile, everyone else? Allegedly too busy wrestling pigs to bother with pen and parchment. But let's flip the medieval manuscript. Sure, most peasants couldn't recite Chaucer on command, but merchants tallying sacks of wool and clerks keeping tabs on the cheese supply definitely knew their way around numbers and letters. Trade and city life demanded receipts, contracts, and IOUs. You can only trust your neighbor so far before you want a witness on parchment, or at least a promise of 3 chickens. If only monks could write, medieval shopping lists would all be solemn Bible verses in Latin. Yet bakers, smiths, and even the romantically inclined wielded quills for charters, receipts, or the occasional love note. "My dearest, 5 chickens await you behind the bakery." Towns boasted proper schools. Yes, really. Where boys, sometimes girls, learned reading, math, and most importantly, how not to torch the classroom with their homework. Guilds kept fastidious records, too. Believe me, you don't run a medieval cheese cartel by memory. Someone had to document who made off with the brie. So while literacy spread unevenly across fields and fiefdoms, the flicker of education wasn't a monk's exclusive flame. It was a growing blaze. In short, the Middle Ages weren't an intellectual blackout, more like a dimmer switch, slowly brightening with every inky signature. Just as education was misunderstood, so too were the practices and effectiveness of medieval medicine. If you think your annoying cousin's essential oil obsession is weird, buckle up. Medieval medicine takes the cake. Imagine the Middle Ages, a headache, a heartbreak, or maybe just a hangnail strikes. Congratulations! Dr. Medieval's go-to cure? Let's bleed you out and see if you feel lighter. No joke. The era's medical scene was basically a Latin-laced prayer session, interrupted by folks clutching buckets like life rafts during spontaneous bloodletting parties. Every ailment was just another chance to cross your fingers and hope a little exsanguination did the trick. And if you weren't bleeding, you were downing concoctions that sounded like a farmer's nightmare. Eye of newt, frog spit, and a generous splash of optimism. But hold your pitchforks before you crown the Middle Ages the Dark Ages of dummies. Fact: medieval Europe boasted university-trained doctors and surprisingly rigorous medical texts. Hospitals, yes, actual buildings with beds and fewer chickens than you'd expect, stood in larger towns. Medical knowledge wasn't all hocus-pocus. It leaned heavily on the sharpest minds of Greek and Arab scholars, blending early science with a pinch of magic for good measure. Monasteries took on nurse-doctor-pharmacist duties, and not every treatment was a death wish. Herbal remedies, for example, have earned a thumbs up from modern science. So yes, medieval patients needed faith, and maybe a sturdy bucket. But medicine back then wasn't all superstition and snake oil. In fact, some treatments have aged better than your cousin's lavender diffuser. And let's be honest, leeches still enjoy a better reputation than WebMD. Alongside medical myths, there are also misconceptions about the nature and intensity of medieval labor. Picture everyone in the past as zombies chained to their plows, slogging non-stop from sunrise to sunset, right? The popular myth paints pre-modern laborers as pitiable drones, trapped in an eternal treadmill of misery. Come on, you've pictured medieval peasants with the world's worst Fitbit stats. But hold your pitchforks. History's story is way juicier and way less relentless than that. Let's ditch the image of peasants perpetually hunched in muddy fields. Medieval workers actually had plenty of plowed time off, PTO, thanks to a bumper crop of religious holidays, saints' days, feasts, even the occasional Holy Tuesday. Peasants sometimes scored nearly half the calendar off. Try asking your boss for that much-paid leave and watch their monocle pop. Then there's the agricultural year itself. Unlike your inbox, the fields actually caught breaks now and then. Farming moved to nature's beat, planting, harvesting, then hibernating during the frosty off-season. So while spring and autumn demanded frantic hustle, winter was less breakneck, more blanket fort. Urban life had its own rhythm. Guilds, basically labor unions in chainmail, regulated artisans' hours and occasionally declared weekends before it was cool. Sure, work was physically demanding, but it wasn't a dawn-to-dusk grind. If non-stop drudgery was universal, who had time to invent mead, music, or medieval mischief? Honestly, the real endurance test wasn't the labor. It was surviving your boss's garlic breath in the candlelit guild hall. The bottom line? Our ancestors broke a sweat but didn't break the space-time continuum working non-stop. Now, if only we could resurrect their holiday schedule. Similarly, assumptions about relentless workdays extend to oversimplified views on medieval fashion. Picture a medieval marketplace, a sea of potato sacks with arms, or so the myth goes. You might imagine a monochrome mosh pit, everyone wrapped in fabrics shouting, "I too am beige." But wander those bustling stalls, and you'd find far more than brown-on-brown action. So much for a world where everyone looked like a brown paper bag at a funeral. Contrary to popular belief, medieval folks weren't colorblind. Those with a few coins jingling in their pouches rocked madder red, woad blue, or saffron yellow, dyes so vibrant they could outshine a peacock's tail. But not everyone got to play dress-up. Enter sumptuary laws. The OG, no shirt, no shoes, no service, only with more ermine and far less democracy. These rules kept the flashy fabrics on the elite runway, while peasants wrestled fashion restrictions and, occasionally, chickens. Yet even so-called dowdy peasants found ways to work a colorful hood or downright flashy hose. Ye olde Fashion Week, anyone? As the Middle Ages marched on, pun absolutely intended, tailors stitched fitted, layered, sometimes flamboyant outfits, especially for anyone bold enough to call themselves a trendsetter. Clothes were patched and repaired, yes, but also jazzed up and handed down, transformed to fit new bodies and fresh attitudes. In short, what you wore was your social status update, your LinkedIn profile, and your emoji all in one. Whether you flaunted furs or sported a well-mended tunic, everyone in medieval society had a style story to tell. So next time someone claims history's just beige, remind them medieval folks could seriously dress to impress. Finally, while clothing is often thought to be dull and shapeless, myths about medieval violence also tend to exaggerate the reality of daily life. Picture every Viking household as a WWE arena. Wrong. The mental image of wild-haired Norse folk suplexing each other over breakfast oats is about as historically accurate as Thor boasting sparkling Hollywood abs. The myth that Vikings came with built-in black eyes and grudges every Tuesday owes more to sagas and B-list Hollywood than to actual daily Viking diaries. The truth? Less smash and grab, more plow and plant. Most Norse folk spent their days farming, trading, or crafting. Their famous axes chopped wood, not neighbors. Dueling did happen, but usually as a last-ditch conflict resolution, not a Viking version of Good Morning Sunshine. If every squabble ended in sword fights, there'd be no one left to milk the cows, because Vikings knew you can't churn cheese with orphans. Villages were run by laws and assemblies, creatively named things, with a solid system of fines for anyone who added a little too much hemoglobin to the weekly cabbage soup. Raiding, the pastime that inspired 1,000 Halloween costumes, was strictly part-time. Most of the year, Norsemen were knee-deep in sheep, not mayhem. Conflicts? Often settled with clever insults, negotiated payments, or social shaming. Think Norse Judge Judy, not Mortal Kombat. Actual violence, while a saga bestseller, was socially regulated and rarer than goats with symmetrical horns. Those battle scars? Less epic duel, and more over-enthusiastic goat wrestling. And honestly, the bloodiest part of their mornings was probably stepping barefoot on a runestone. So next time you picture a Viking brawl, remember, those were for storytelling by the hearth. Reality was a lot more neighborly, unless you were a cabbage.